All right, man, peace. So, brothers, I'm on record as stating that one of the main reasons why I like to cover sports on my channel is because sports not only is oftentimes a reflection of the human condition, but sports is also a portal that the leaders of this society use to socially engineer this so-called society. Why am I bringing this up? Because over the course of last NBA regular season, one of the storylines that they allowed to develop was this notion about mental health and the problems that certain players in the NBA have with their mental health. And I believe that based on this panel and the conversation that they had on the topic, that they're going to try to correlate the mental health issue that certain players in the NBA have with the new modern Luciferian notion of quote-unquote toxic masculinity. And for those of you brothers out there that are unfamiliar with that phrase or that term, that's the new catch term that's being used to make men feel embarrassed about being men. Much in the same way that they concocted the term homophobe or homophobic for those of us who reject the notion that someone is born with that psychological disposition to actually sexually prefer someone of their own gender, or you're called a misogynist if you speak certain truths pertaining to females. Well, toxic masculinity is them ratcheting up their war against men because they know that inherently the man is the head of the woman. And even though one of the main agendas of this society is to have the female usurp the role of the man, they cannot accomplish this unless they can get certain men, especially men in positions of power, to be complicit in this agenda. So in order for them to do this, for this agenda to come to fruition, they have to make men, particularly males, I should say, let me specify males, feel embarrassed about their masculinity. Because in the same way that both the sun and the moon have their vocations, they have their purposes. The sun is the greater light, the moon is the lesser light, and there's no changing that. In the same way, the man has his vocation, the woman has her vocation or her role. Both their roles are essential, they're irreplaceable. But the man has a certain vocation as the head, as the leader. And in order for him to be dethroned or usurped, you have to make him feel like he's doing an injustice to the woman by showing his natural nature of rulership. Every time he speaks in an authoritarian way, it's because he's a so-called quote-unquote misogynist. Certain brothers out there may feel like I'm being far-fetched, but just pay attention this up-and-coming regular season. They are going to try to link the so-called mental health issue in the NBA with quote-unquote toxic masculinity. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
But first, we turn our attention to a serious topic that's quickly making the rounds in the league: mental health. DeMar DeRozan spoke candidly back in February about his bouts with depression. Kevin Love followed a week later with a Players Tribune article in which he chronicled his struggles with mental health, even citing one instance in November when he went to the locker room during a game as he suffered a panic attack. ESPN's Jackie McMullen sat down with Love to get more insight on what it's like being an NBA player battling depression and anxiety.
Let me say this very quickly. There's a reason why they have a female reporter covering this story. In the same way, if any of you brothers watch the CBS Morning News, whenever they have a psychiatrist on their show, I would say 95% of the time they're going to make sure that it's a female, because they want to cast the female as an authoritarian on psychological issues. They want to cast her in the role archetype as someone who should be considered an authority figure, or someone who is in control of her mental faculties while men are not. There was a commercial starring Lena Waithe, and they also had Draymond Green in it. I believe that it was a Nike commercial. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that it was. Where Lena Waithe, those of you who are familiar with her, she's a very famous quote-unquote lesbian in Hollywood. She was cast as a psychiatrist, and Draymond Green was coming to see her. I'll probably cover that commercial. Maybe I'll review it for this channel. When I saw that, I said right away, it's very obvious that not only are they trying to normalize the configuration of the female as being the authority figure or the standard for mental health, but also they're trying to subconsciously get the man to accept that a lesbian, a cross-dresser, and most likely soon to be a transsexual should be considered normal, not only normal, but someone that you should go to for guidance.
You know, people reaching out for help or talking to someone, it does really work. And for so long I put that off, thinking I didn't need it, because that was my playbook when I was young, is to suppress it and be a man. And I think the masculinity thing is a kind of misleading in a lot of ways because.
Now, brothers, did you hear that? I don't believe that what Kevin Love stated was meant to further any type of agenda to lessen manhood or to assist females in usurping the role of the man or what have you, but you never know. At the end of the day, it seems to me that he purposefully chose to correlate his mental health issues with what he was taught about masculinity as a child. And let me say this, I did a video a while ago called Attack of the Pansexuals, and I'll probably be adding to that series relatively soon. It was starring a teacher from Brooklyn by the name of Andre Brady. And in that video, I stated that, particularly so-called black people, we don't do a good enough job listening to our children and what they have to say in regards to what they go through. I don't think that it's necessarily a gender issue. I think that people have to show a level of compassion and simpatico, per se, with what their children are going through, and to make sure that the lines of communication are open so that they don't end up trying to seek solace in drugs or alcohol or wanton sex, so on and so forth, joining gangs or what have you. These are things that can happen if there's not some level of transparency between a parent and a child, particularly in regards to things that go on, because they'll have a trickle-down effect into adulthood, as we can see with Mr. Kevin Love here. He's trying to make it a masculinity issue, but there are just as many young girls who also now have anxiety attacks as women because they went through certain situations and maybe they felt ashamed to confide in someone when they were a child.
Because when that's ingrained in your mind in an early age, you feel that way throughout.
In Jackie's article titled "The Courageous Fight to Fix the NBA's Mental Health Problem," Jackie discusses the new debate on whether players should have to disclose their mental health records to team owners and general managers. Jackie went on the Woj Pod to discuss. Take a listen.
And has, sometimes has financial ramifications, right? If your team isn't the understanding kind, if your team doesn't, isn't ready to be proactive and forward thinking about this, maybe it's going to cost you a free agent contract. Maybe it's going to be the difference between you getting traded or released.
This is nothing new. For those of us who grew up watching basketball in the 90s, we know about Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman had a mental breakdown during the last couple of years while he was playing with the Detroit Pistons. There are a few reasons for that. Me personally, I believe that Dennis Rodman was a monarch athlete, but beyond that, his wife cheated on him with one of his teammates. I believe it was Benny Johnson, if I remember correctly, allegedly. And there was a point in which he was near suicide, and that is when he concocted the character. At least this is his official story. This is when he decided that he was going to change his image and concoct the character that he became known for the rest of his career, dyeing his hair with the excessive tattoos, etc. But there are many cases of athletes going through depression. Isaiah Thomas stated in the 80s, especially after he threw the ball away to Larry Bird, he was depressed for that whole summer. Magic Johnson was depressed after the 1984 NBA Finals. These things do occur. But it just seems very interesting to me that they've decided to carry on this mental health storyline into the offseason, when, as far as we know, there have only been a few players, a minute portion or a minute percentage of NBA players that have stated that they believe that they have mental health issues. So I believe that they're going to try to correlate this mental health phenomenon in the NBA with toxic masculinity. And that gets me to another point. As I tell you, brothers, in many of these videos, there's a reason why there's such an onus being placed on the NFL to change their ways, quote unquote, because they want the NFL to be a woke league like the NBA is. The powers that be know that if they want to use any sports league as a portal or as a proxy agent to propagate their agendas, they can use the NBA with no problem, because most of their top stars are monarch athletes. Most of them are Kabbalists. Many of them behind closed doors are engaged in Luciferian rituals, so on and so forth. And they're part of the show. They're part of the game. And then you also have prominent athletes in their league that are legitimately suffering from psychological issues and disorders, because that's a very pressurized environment. We watch the games for enjoyment. They're playing the game for their livelihood. And many of the elite players in the NBA, if they don't win, they become depressed.
In her article, Jackie says, quote, NBA owners, who in some cases are paying their players hundreds of millions of dollars, want access to the files of their investments. That isn't, however, how the league sees it. NBA spokesman Mike Bass says, the NBA fully supports protecting the confidentiality of players' mental health information and, accordingly, committed to the Players Association that any mental health program we undertake would do so. So, Amin, I'll start with you. What are the biggest concerns about mental health in the NBA, and what should the league do?
Let me say this first off. The biggest concerns about mental health, quote unquote, in the NBA is that one of their top stars could possibly have a mental breakdown. And I believe that we've seen certain stars have mental breakdowns, but not the type that we're accustomed to. I believe that many of them have had self-destruct breakdowns. I believe James Harden had one a couple of years ago when he flamed out against the San Antonio Spurs. We've seen that every once in a while, especially over the last couple of years in the playoffs. I think that Kevin Durant is also someone who may be having issues intermittently with his mental health. That's why I state that I think that the reason why he likes to go back and forth on social media is because it's a form of catharsis for him. Because if he was to just let that go, read all of that negative and vitriolic commentary about him and let it go, it would wear him down mentally, psychologically.
Well, I mean, obviously from a player's perspective, you have your right to privacy, and everything that Jackie talked about is correct, that this could influence, right? But I'm going to be the jerk for a second. I know it's not a role I'm accustomed to.
That's okay. We all need jerks around because oftentimes the jerks are the truth tellers.
And speak from a team's perspective, right? So people are talking about mental health. We should treat it the same way we treat regular health. A guy tears his ACL, guy has a panic attack. These are all kind of similar things medically that are happening to them that's preventing them from doing what they need to do on the court. If a guy tears his ACL, the team knows about it. Mm-hmm. If a player like DeJuan Blair, for instance, has no ACLs, the teams know about it, his draft stock falls. Michael Porter Jr., bad back, teams know about it, his draft stock falls. So if we're going to treat mental health like health, then the teams do have a right to know about it, and it should affect your stock because what we're basically talking about is your availability to perform in a given situation.
Absolutely, because the team is making an investment in you. At the end of the day, you're viewed as a financial asset. They're paying you a certain amount of money according to where you were drafted, and they expect you to perform at a certain level commensurate with how much money they've invested in you. So if you have a mental issue, that's almost equivalent to you buying a luxury vehicle and finding out that the engine is not functioning properly, but you didn't know it until you got the car already, until you bought it already. Of course, you're going to take it back to the dealership.
If teams have the right to know about it, they're going to know nothing because what you're basically telling guys is, look, you have to suppress this. You cannot trust these team-employed psychologists. If that's a situation where you know that information is flowing from you to your psychologist or your mental health professional straight to the owner and GM, there is no way guys are going to be willing to go in there and trust those people and reach out for help. And then it's right back to the situation that Kevin Love was talking about where you're suppression. If you care about the health of the players, that stuff has to absolutely be private, just like if ESPN cares about our mental health. When we go to a therapist, they're not privy to that information.
But it's interesting, too, because Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan, two guys that you talked about, Kevin Love ends up signing a huge contract after he makes his revelation in the, to the Players Tribune. What's interesting about it, though, a lot of teams over the years in every sport have employed kind of counselors that they want players to approach and to talk to. And you mentioned trust him. A lot of the times the players don't trust those guys because they're...
Nor should they trust them. Let's be for real. Team psychiatrists or psychologists or what have you, they're acting as intermediaries between the player and the executives of the organization or the team that they're quote-unquote playing for. So how could you trust them implicitly? You just can't. In the same way that many players today do not trust team doctors because the team doctor wants you back out there on the field or on the court. So this is a very dicey situation overall. Mentally, how exactly do you know when someone is fully healed from whatever they claim that they're suffering from? At least you can do an MRI. You can scan someone's knee. You can't scan their brain to tell if everything is functioning up to snuff.
Because they're worried that counselor could be serving almost like as a spy to management. So I always think there's going to be a lot of mistrust. I would say this. There's no way the Players Association is ever going to sign off on something like this. No way agents would ever do it, and players would never do it.
Well, it doesn't feel like Adam Silver is even potentially signing off on this, as we saw the statement from the league. But Adam Silver joined C.J. McCollum on stage, I believe, maybe for one of his podcasts, and here's what he had to say.
I was talking to Michelle Roberts, Executive Director of the Players Association. They are also putting in place a state-of-the-art program so that if for some reason a player isn't comfortable talking to his team directly, isn't comfortable dealing with the league, you can go right to the Players Association and they'll have an independent program which is kept private.
Well, that's a good idea. If that's something that they're actually going to actualize, that's a good thing. Because I do believe that for years, many NBA players have suffered in silence. I did a video on Charles Barkley, his highs and lows. And as he was reenacting some of the pivotal moments of that 1993 finals, you could tell that he still suffers psychological damage from that series because he truly thought that he was going to win. And he looks back at that was the closest that he ever got to winning the championship. And for those of you brothers who have not seen the video, go back and watch it. Or if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it for the first time. You can see that as Charles is reciting in his mind all the plays, he talks about how Scottie Pippen was doubling down on him and he thought he should have went for the shot, but he didn't. He passed it to Frank Johnson and Frank Johnson was scared to shoot, so on and so forth. These are things that still replay in his mind day after day after day after day. And I'm not sure if Sir Charles has ever sought any psychological or psychiatric support for that. But it's very obvious that those memories are still having a deleterious effect on his overall psychological health. I have little doubt about that. And oftentimes he's on the panel with Ernie and Kenny and Shaq, and he tries to act as if he does not care that he never won a championship. It's obvious that he does care, and he still does care.
The interesting part to me is this. I think the league, particularly under Adam Silver, has done a really good job of making the players feel like this is their league too. So I understand, and look, I can empathize, okay? I've had panic attacks. I've dealt with depression and anxiety. I see a therapist, and thankfully ESPN allows me the opportunity to do that. But I think that you mentioned trust. I trust that that information won't get back to ESPN, and I can keep it to myself if I want to, or I can discuss it freely like we just did now. But because the league has done such a great job of bridging that gap between players and owners in so many other capacities, don't you feel like this could be something they could do as well?
Absolutely. And I want to be clear. There's a difference between what you should do as a good person and what, as a general manager, as a team, trying to make decisions, trying to win games. Man, I'm trying to get every advantage I can get.
Absolutely. There's no crying in baseball, and you cannot be scared to step on toes in basketball. Basketball is probably the #1 trash-talking sport. Of course, trash talking goes on in every sport, but when it comes to basketball, if players can find out any information on you where they could destabilize your mentality on the court, they're going to find it out. I recited this story a while ago. Stephen A. Smith on First Take stated that there was a player who told him that they told another player during a very pivotal playoff series that they were sleeping with that player's wife, and that player was mentally done after that. These are the type of things that go on in high-level competition. So if a player were to come out and state that they're dealing with some type of psychiatric issue or psychological issue, for him to believe that everyone's going to pat him on the back or top-level general managers are going to want to sign him, that's just foolishness. I said last season when DeMar DeRozan acknowledged and admitted that he has psychological issues, that means that he can never be an alpha in the NBA. Ever. And I said this before he was traded, so I was not surprised when he got traded, particularly to the team that he got traded to, because Greg Popovich, as I've been telling you brothers for a long time, is known for his ability to psychologically manipulate his players. I personally believe that he's an MK handler, as most top-level coaches in professional sports are. So it was not a shock to me when DeMar DeRozan acknowledged that he has mental problems, and all of a sudden he gets traded to the San Antonio Spurs.
And if that means I got to find out what, yeah, that's a real thing.
But doesn't that happen, though, over the course of, let's say you're drafting a player.
Right.
You're interviewing so many people from his background, including his college coach, friends of his. You're going to sit down with the player themselves. Come on, I mean, you worked in the front office. You know that there are whispers about certain players in the league, and that kind of gets out there.
For some people, it ain't even whispers. It's known, The big thing about this great series that Jackie's working on is how many guys came on the record to talk about it.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I'm looking at it like, yeah, I knew. Yeah, I knew. I don't know how I knew, but if you're in the circles, you know.
But you're talking about, okay, we need to be privy to this information as teams so we don't make mistakes. How about...
Hell, back in the day, once again going back to the early to mid-90s, You brothers will remember a couple of players who I think had psychological issues or mental issues. Vernon Maxwell of the Houston Rockets and John Starks of the New York Knicks. They were known for being extremely fiery. They would explode at the drop of a hat. I remember John Starks got kicked out of a playoff game when he headbutt Reggie Miller. He just totally lost it. And even in that Bulls series in 1993, Jordan knew that he could make John Starks erupt and go over the edge. Jordan was very good at that with his trash talk. He could make players from the opposing team want to fight him with no problem. As a matter of fact, Jordan and Vernon Maxwell used to get into it all the time. There was a while for about 6 straight games over 3 seasons where Vernon Maxwell and Jordan would get into some type of shoving and pushing match every game. But Vernon Maxwell's another one who I believe was dealing with some type of psychological issue. That's just me saying this from afar. Okay, that's all I'm saying. But this has been going on for a very long time. That's my point. And you have certain players who get broken. I remember in the 1990s, there was a second baseman for the New York Yankees named Chuck Knobloch. He just could not throw the ball to first base, and he was a second baseman. A little 15-foot throw. He could not make that throw. And eventually, he ended up out of major leagues. He was an extraordinary second baseman for a few years. I believe he started off with the Minnesota Twins, because I think that he was on that Twins team with Kirby Puckett that won the World Series in '91 against the Braves. Played a couple of years there and then went to the New York Yankees and was very good. He was on those Yankee championship teams, but after a while, the man could not throw to first base. And this happens all throughout sports where players just break down mentally.
You're protecting your investment by encouraging these players to have the ability to address those issues. That, to me, is a much more effective form. Okay, maybe if you have the information, first of all, again, you're basically telling players, look, you should be scared to deal with your mental health issues. That is much more damaging than...
Well, I think that the message really should be, and really should always have been, to people who think that they're suffering from some type of psychological disorder, that you have to handle your issues with tact. If you're an NBA player, presumably you're making at the very least 6 figures, going into 7 figures. You should be able to find someone who can mentally support you, and you can keep it confidential. It's good that the NBA claims that they're going to provide avenues for their players, but for you to be mentally capable, mentally just aware of what's going on within you, within your mindset, you should be able to get up and say, you know what, there's something going on with me, I need help. And that's why I made the statement that I made earlier in the video. A lot of times, these issues that people have in adulthood are trickled down from what happened in their childhood. That's why it's important for parents to be able to talk to their children.
Then saying, okay, we're not going to make a mistake on this contract because we have this official diagnosis. When, like Frank said, these guys, their backgrounds, the stuff is so thorough that they know there's issues. They might not know an official diagnosis.
It's one of those things where it's, yes, you're right, but also, if I have a chance, I'm taking it, right?
Absolutely. That's how it goes.
Right? It's just like, should I pull my opponent's jersey while he's trying to cut? No, that's cheating. But if I can do it, and I'm not going to go,
what about the level of player? I'm sorry, but what about the level of player? It's one thing for Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah.
What about that guy who's the 15th man on the roster? Does he want to come out and talk about this, where they might say, you know what, is this really the guy that we want to give $500,000 to? We'll give it to somebody.
You can argue.
Well, to be quite frank with you, if someone who's sitting on the end of the bench decides to publicize that he has a mental health issue, this might be the time to do it because everybody's so sensitive about it. But to be quite frank with you, just the fact that he will come out and say that he has a mental health problem and he's at the end of the bench, his team might let him go not because of his mental health issue, but because he's such a bad decision maker. You have to know where you are in life. It's called self-awareness. You have to know how expendable you are, because the way that people treat you when they want you is far different from how they treat you when they need you. Two totally different dynamics.
So you can argue that that's what happened to Royce White. He was a guy who was very open about it.
That's what I was going to bring up next.
But what ended up happening, sorry.
That's okay.
But when it happened with Royce White, a lot of people said, oh, he got blackballed. He didn't get blackballed, but there is an element of how good is he? Is he worth it? Right?
Yeah.
If we're LeBron, yeah.
Hey,
doesn't matter.
DeMar DeRozan. Delonte West's career.
Absolutely. Delonte West. That was the name I was about to mention. Delonte West ended up out of the league because of his mental issues.
Career ended, because while he was absolutely an NBA caliber player, the mental health issues and his struggles with that.
And then on top of that, yes, Delonte West was an NBA caliber player, but he was a fringe NBA caliber player, which goes back to the point. The more expendable you are, the better you have to act, or at least the better you have to be able to manage your mental health issues.
His inability to kind of get his arms around it and keep his arms around it, it became a situation where the production and all the issues.
And now that I think of it, I reflect back to that situation when Kevin Love first joined the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it seemed like he had a problem ingratiating himself to his teammates, and LeBron James came with his normal passive-aggressive nonsense of you should try to fit in as opposed to trying to fit out. Maybe Kevin Love was having anxiety issues about whether or not he was going to be good enough to assist that team, and whether or not they were going to blame him for not being good enough, and that's why he had trouble fitting in with his teammates.
It didn't work, and the Mavericks, the last team he played for, they tried hard to help him, and he just couldn't get his arms around.
So the analogy I use is, if we're going to treat it like it's a health concern and not touchy-feely stuff like we used to, right? If there was a player who had consistently kept getting hurt, are you going to give him a full max deal and say, oh, no, he's good for it? Depends on the talent. Joel Embiid got hurt a lot. Guess what? That talent says I'm paying him. But like you said, Frank, if it's a fringe guy, no, I'm just going to get the next one who doesn't have that health issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because he's expendable.
Yeah, I just think there's a way to bridge that gap, right? And that to me is the bigger issue here, and I'm with Amin on that. That if you're going to treat regular health the same way as mental health, you're going to have these things come up, right? So you're going to have to just kind of find a way for Adam Silver, the Players Association, the owners, everyone to get together in a room and try to iron this stuff out. So, well, Frank and Tip.
But anyway, that's basically it on that. It was a pretty good conversation that they had. Of course, mental health is an issue that you must take very, very seriously, because at the end of the day, if you're not mentally healthy, you're going to either hurt the people around you, or you're going to hurt yourself, or both. But once again, watch out for this oncoming NBA season and attempt to correlate the mental health problems that they're going to try to exacerbate and exaggerate in the NBA. They're going to try to correlate the mental health issues of the male NBA players with quote-unquote toxic masculinity. Watch out for that. So anyway, peace.